Thanks for logging on to Wayne.com for another edition of Inside the Zone. He's Blake Seabringer, the News Sentinel. I'm Glenn Marini, and the All-Star break has come to a close. The Komets played just one game last week, but it was a big one. Down in Evansville, they win 4-2. Blake, tell me why that game was so important to start the second half.
Well, because if they lose, they've lost 3 in a row. They would have lost to a last-place team. You're down 2-0, and look how much better it is now that they came back to win. It really gives them momentum now, hopefully going into the second half.
And you take a look at the young guys, Dunbar with a big goal in that game, but as you mentioned in an article recently, some of the young guys that have been called up have been playing very well for the Komets.
Well, and it's usually this time of year that you look for the young guys to come in and give the team a boost. I mean, you expect the rookies to take over a little bit more. You know, the older guys are their legs are getting a little heavy with that many games, and you hope for the younger guys to step up. And these guys all did. Nick Wheeler, John Dunbar, Mike Hobein, they've all played very, very well, and they've really given the Komets a boost.
28 games left in the regular season, and I know Komets have 14 of those at home. What's the key for them to improve their game at home down the stretch?
Well, they need to come out fast. Every game it seems like the other team scores first at home, and then they're fighting from behind, and they give everything they got, and then they come out in this third period and they're kind of gassed because they had to kill off a bunch of penalties and they fought so hard to get back, and then they give up one goal and then it all falls apart. I mean, they got to get off to a better start.
Well, we already mentioned some of the young guys, but the biggest news of last week wasn't really the All-Star break or the All-Star game.
And big, no pun intended.
Yeah, 6'5", Matt Sierzinski coming back with the Komets. He's been out of hockey for about 2.5 years. Talk about what he brings, why he was a good fit to bring in at this point in the season, and what you see going forward, perhaps as Matt's role.
Many benefits to bringing Matt back. One, he knows the situation here. He knows Coach Sims. He knows Colin. He knows what his role is. Matt is a guy who never tries to show that he can do everything. He sticks to what he's good at, and he's very good at standing in front of the net and banging home rebounds.
A guy that plays the way that Matt does, kind of sits there in front, bangs the rebounds home, like you said, is it easier for him to kind of get on the same page and easier for him to kind of assimilate himself into a team as opposed to a guy who might be out there on the wing?
You know, we talked about Konstantin Shafronov when he came back, same thing. Kevin Bertram, kind of the same thing. You know, I mean, they'd been sitting out for a while and they came back. But they were never the Schrock guys, the guys who skate the length of the ice, or they do a lot of skating on the forecheck and that. It's like, Matt, go stand on the board, and block the pass that comes that way, and then go to the front of the net. That's what Matt does. You know, I mean, Shaffy, he was never a fantastic skater. He was a good skater, but it was because he was so smart. He knew all the shortcuts to get there, type of thing. Same thing with Bertie. Bertie would stand in front of the net and bang. You know, I mean, and that's kind of Matt's role with all this too. So hopefully, he's hoping to play this weekend. So we'll see what happens. If not, they're going to Colorado for 3 games out there. They got lots of time to practice out there and that kind of thing too, to get ready. Yeah,
and in years past, like you mentioned, guys coming back, maybe David Huckalo from an injury in the offseason, who had to pick things up at midseason. There's in shape and there's hockey shape.
Right.
I know you saw him at practice working out today. How close till he's in that hockey shape?
Doesn't matter what you are shape-wise for practice. The games are totally different. So it'll take a good 2-3 weeks of games to get into game shape.
All right, and one guy we're certainly eagerly awaiting his return is Colin Chalk. Suffered kind of a minor setback. What do you see as the timeline for him, and when are we going to see Colin back on the ice? Because there was some talk at the end of last week that we might see him against Evansville or perhaps later this week.
Yeah.
But that doesn't look to be the case.
He's had a little bit of a setback with his shoulder, probably 3 weeks. And then you go from there. He's skating again, which is good, and he's had no problems with his foot at all. So that's good news too. The shoulder thing, they don't know what's going on right now. They're working on it. But he hasn't slowed down his training at all. I mean, I was talking to him and Ciro after practice today, and they're like making their afternoon, when are we going to the rink, and where are we going, or when are we going to the gym, and we'll be there, and so that hasn't slowed him down that way. Plus, I think it's just as important to get Colin behind the bench again, too, to help out with some of that stuff.
One guy it looks like they are going to be getting back on the ice very soon is Thomas Beauregard. When he went out, he had 14 goals. That was tied for the team lead with J.M. Risk at that point.
With about half the games.
Yeah. What do you see about Thomas? Is he going to play this week? It's a sore shoulder, some upper body issue. What is he going to be able to do?
The cool thing about Thomas is he's been skating for 2 weeks. So he's ready to go. He's going to go Wednesday in Kalamazoo. And I think that immediately makes your power play better. It'll make some of your lines better. It's just going to be, every time you can bring back people like Sierozinski, Beauregard, and Chalk, you've got a number one line essentially that you're adding to the top of your depth. So it makes everybody better, hopefully.
And the big question, I think, this week, aside from the injuries and the guys they're bringing in, the Komets have to figure out a goalie situation. Tell us where they are in terms of the goalies on the roster, counting Boucher, who we haven't seen this season and may not, where they are, because they got to make a move sometime relatively shortly about their goaltending position.
Well, and the schedule's part of that too, Glenn, because now they've got 28 games in 57 days where they had 25 games in 44 games. So there was more opportunities for goalies to play, although Kenny Ryder pretty much took over from that spot. So you got to think Kenny's going to be around, and David Franke said today they got to get down to 2 goalies. They got to, and it's not so much that you need the roster spot, is you got to get the other guy sharp too. And there's not going to be as much opportunity in these last 28 games to play all 3, and keep them sharp. You got to, and I think we've seen that because, Charlie hasn't played in the last 12 games now. Cousineau's played once, and I think of that time, so Ryder's getting most of the chances, but you've got to get a second guy. So what if Ryder goes down? You want somebody who's coming into like training camp shape, essentially. I don't think you want that. And as much as those guys are staying after and working on it and stuff, you got to get into games to get it be sharp.
And in this decision, there's more than just who's the hot hand, who's playing well, because you have to not only look for the next couple of weeks or for the playoffs, you have to think about even next year when you're making this decision.
In a way, yeah, because we don't know what Nick's situation is going to be for next year, or are the Komets going to be affiliated next year? And if they're not, does that mean you keep maybe Charlie because you want Charlie back next year? Or if you're going to be affiliated, does that mean you go with Cousineau because you want to keep Norfolk happy and Anaheim happy? There's a whole bunch of things that go into this, and it's a great problem to have because both guys and Nick, they've all treated it tremendously well. It's really fun to watch them at practice and all 4 working together and stuff, and really working to help stay sharp as much as they possibly can in practice. They all get along. Everybody likes them all. There's no locker room problems that way. So it's kind of a nice problem to have, but it is getting to be a problem.
Yeah, you had a nice article last week about Charlie's attitude and the way that these guys are approaching it, even though they're not all getting equal amounts of ice time. But I want to move on to Bush, because that's a big question people have had since he had hip surgery this last offseason. Is he going to come back? Is he going to come back this year? Is it going to be next year? How effective can he be? How many of those questions do you think have been answered, and how many of them are still out there in the ether?
I think they're all still out there because, and this is not a knock in any way, he's not going to know until he tries it. And he's not ready to try it yet. He's been cleared to skate and push pucks around and maybe help with a little coaching and that type of thing, but he hasn't been cleared to put the pads on. And the closer you get to the end of the year, the harder that's going to be, because where do you find time for him? Or do you send him to Pensacola or Dayton and try it out? I think that's what they do, but then do those teams want him in that situation too? There's a whole lot of factors involved. I think if you'll see Nick when you see him type of thing. It's like you don't know, and I don't think he knows. But I think he'll come back next year.
Yeah, his place in Komets history is fairly well established.
Yeah. As one doing of the best. Last year what he did in the playoffs, playing on 2 hips that needed surgery. It was not a Pokey Reddick wiping through the playoffs, but it was every bit as impressive as Don Atchison's playing in '73. Being a rookie and starting the second game and carrying him all the way through. Doing that on 2 hips that needed surgery is just. That tells you why Nick's the bulldog,
And speaking of roster moves, you were mentioning before the show off camera that you talked to the Frankes today. They're looking for a defenseman as well, perhaps, to add. Where are they in that situation? Who are some names? I know I threw out Franke to you as a possibility to add.
I don't know if that's a strong possibility or not. It depends on what kind of shape he'd be in and if he'd even be interested. But you never know, Nothing would surprise you with them. Anybody who's played here before, they always say, this doesn't close the door. Call me if you think you want to come back sometime. And it's amazing how often it works. But I have a feeling they're looking more towards Europe for that guy to see if they can bring somebody.
And is that all because of, or in part because they don't think they're going to get Brett Henley back?
I think that's part of it, but they've needed a offensive defenseman to run the power play. Now that Nick Schaus is going back to Norfolk, they need somebody like that.
A la Frankie DeAngelis.
Yeah, a la kind of, but those are the hardest thing to find. I mean, the two hardest thing to find are power forwards and offensive defensemen, and they've pulled a power forward out of thin air in Matt. So you got to find that offensive defenseman, and that's a really hard thing to find.
Final question going forward to this week. 3 games, Wednesday at Kalamazoo, Saturday at home against Kalamazoo, and then hosting Cincinnati on Saturday. Obviously, since games against Cincinnati are at a premium as we go down the stretch with them in first place. What do you expect to happen this week for the Komets, and what are going to be some of the keys to being successful?
I think this is where they got to turn it up. I really do. They need to sweep all 3 games. And it's time, to put the pressure on them. I really feel like it's time for them to get hot. The schedule sets up beautifully for them. The rest of the way, they're getting Ciro, they're getting Bo. No more excuses. I don't care. Nobody should care anymore. Win at home, guys. Win at home, period. Get mad, get angry, get anxious, whatever. Get hungry. Win at home, period. That's it.
All right.
If they had won, 2/3 of their games at home this year, they'd be in first place by a mile.
That's true. They were in second place for a day this past week. So really, first place, 9 points, I think, is what they're down right now.
Yeah.
But a head-to-head game against Cincinnati on Saturday, that could certainly help sway things in the Komets' favor.
Time to put the pedal down.
All right, we'll see if it happens this Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday. But we'll have it all recapped for you next Monday on Inside the Zone. He's Blake Sebring. I'm Glenn Marini. We'll see you then.